Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The U.S. hits China with a slew of new tariffs. The White House says it's to counter the Chinese regime's unfair business practices. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley is at the White House with the details.
The Biden administration announced today that it finalized new tariffs on China. That's a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, 60% on solar panel parts, and 25% on EV batteries, critical minerals, steel, aluminum, face masks, and much, much more. Now, the tariffs will go into effect on September 27th.
The president, back in May, when he was announcing that he was going to take action, he said very clearly he was going to do that to protect Americans, workers, and businesses from China's unfair trade practices.
The Chinese Communist Party subsidizes its companies so that they can produce cheap goods and flood the market. In response, Western nations have been hiking tariffs on the Chinese regime in recent months. At the last presidential debate, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Trump clashed over tariffs on China. Trump said that he intends to raise tariffs on China to 60% on all items across the board. Harris, meanwhile, has said that his intention to raise tariffs on other countries would be a sales tax on the middle class and that it could lead to higher prices for Americans in the short term. But those in favor of Trump's proposal say that tariffs could benefit domestic industry and encourage supply chains to move out of China. Now, on top of all this, the Biden administration said today that it's working to end a tax exemption on all low-cost products under $800 coming from China. And here at the White House, President Biden's meeting with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. They're meeting over whether they should allow Ukraine to fire their missiles into Russia. The missiles would be used to hit airfields, missile launchers, and fuel tanks. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has said that allowing this would equate to NATO countries going to war with Russia. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The U.S. today announcing more sanctions against Russian state media. Just last week, the U.S. accused the Russian outlet of meddling in American presidential elections. The State Department is now alleging that the outlet's role could go far beyond that.
Our most powerful antidote to Russia's lies is the truth.
The U.S. State Department on Friday announced sanctions against 3 individuals with ties to Russia's RT media service. Just last week, the U.S. alleged that RT had paid online personalities in the U.S. to influence the presidential elections. Now, the State Department is accusing RT of conducting similar operations outside of the U.S., for example, in Germany, countries in Africa, and other places around the globe. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken suggested that RT's role could go far beyond influence operations. He said the outlet is allegedly a key part of Russia's war machine.
One of its projects is a large online crowdfunding program in Russia, operating within RT and through social media channels to provide support and military equipment, supplies, weaponry to Russian military units in Ukraine.
He added that the crowdfunding campaign pays for sniper rifles, body armor, and other equipment for Russian soldiers. Meanwhile, in Ukraine on Friday, President Volodymyr Zelensky talked about a plan for lasting peace. He's set to present the plan to President Biden.
I will present him with a victory plan, a system of interconnected decisions which will give Ukraine the strength it needs, enough power to steer this war onto the road of peace.
Zelensky is expected to travel to the United Nations General Assembly later this month. And in Russia, the Kremlin announced the expulsion of 6 British diplomats. Moscow is accusing them of spying and committing sabotage. Russia said a British Foreign Office department in London was tasked with ensuring Russia's defeat in the war. Moscow argues that's why the British diplomats are putting Russia's security at risk. A Kremlin spokesperson said the decision to expel the diplomats is not intended to cut diplomatic ties with London. British officials said the accusations are baseless and that Russia is retaliating after the UK removed diplomatic status from several Russian properties in May.
Families of hostages held in the Gaza Strip are making their voices heard in Israel. This comes as tensions continue to escalate between Israel and the Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon. NTD's Jason Perry has the story and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
On Friday, family members of hostages blocked a bridge in Tel Aviv as they continue to plead for their loved ones to be released. Over 100 hostages have been held captive by Hamas in the Gaza Strip for almost a year now, including this man's son.
Today, like another day, doesn't matter day or night, weekdays or end of the weekdays, we are fighting, I am fighting for the release of the hostages, release of my son.
We need the government to understand that they must sign this hostage deal as soon as possible. Hostages are dying and we have no more time.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that more pressure should be put on Hamas to accept a new ceasefire deal, while Hamas, on the other hand, has said it does not want any new conditions in the deal the U.S. had proposed previously. Netanyahu also said that any permanent ceasefire deal must allow Israel to maintain control of the border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, also known as the Philadelphia Corridor. Israel has destroyed many tunnels in this area that it says were used for smuggling weapons to Hamas. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, a family got stuck underneath the rubble of a building that was hit by an Israeli airstrike, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Rescuers were able to save this boy, his father, and his sister, who is in critical condition. And sadly, the boy's mother and his other sister were killed in the strike. And in Lebanon on Friday, the Hezbollah terrorist group said the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, wrote them a letter thanking Hezbollah for their support in the conflict with Israel. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, said that Israeli forces are close to fulfilling their mission in the Gaza Strip, and their focus will turn to the Lebanon border. And in the meantime, Israel is keeping up the pressure on Hezbollah. On Friday, Israeli forces reported striking 140 terror targets in Lebanon over the past week. Jason Perry, NTD News.
We're just 7 weeks away from the November election, and both presidential candidates are ramping up their post-debate campaign blitz. Former President Trump is on the West Coast outlining key policy proposals for California. NTD's Christina Corona attended his speech at a press conference near Los Angeles.
We're here in Rancho Palos Verdes, where former President Donald Trump outlined plans to improve California. Trump addressed key policy issues, including lowering taxes and immigration reform.
The real threat is what's happening at our border, because you have thousands of people being killed by illegal migrants coming in and also dying. You have women dying as they come up. They're coming up in large groups. We call it a caravan.
Trump touched on the impact of illegal immigrants in Springfield, the Ohio city at the center of a nationwide immigration controversy. He also promised large deportation.
In Springfield, Ohio, 20,000 illegal Haitian migrants have descended upon a town of 58,000 people, destroying their way of life. I can say this, we will do large deportations from Springfield, Ohio. Large deportations. We're going to get these people out. We're bringing them back to Venezuela. It's like an invasion from within.
This event comes just one day after he made remarks in Tucson, Arizona, where he unveiled a new policy on taxes.
I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime. The people who work overtime are among the hardest working citizens in our country. And for too long, no one in Washington has been looking out for them. They're police officers, nurses, factory workers, construction workers, truck drivers, and machine operators. It's time for the working man and woman to finally catch a break.
Just 2 days after the debate with Vice President Kamala Harris, Trump said he'll only debate her again if, quote, he's in the mood.
I did great with the debates, and I think they've answered everything. But maybe if I got in the right mood, I don't know. Right now I'm leading, and I'm leading in every single poll on the debates. Thank you.
Trump is scheduled to attend a private fundraiser in San Mateo County before heading to address supporters at the World Market Center in downtown Las Vegas. Reporting from the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Trump also commented on his relationship with controversial activist Laura Loomer, saying he doesn't control her and that she's a supporter and a, quote, free spirit. On the Democratic side, the Harris-Walz campaign continues its swing state visits this week. This as the Trump team responds to some of Vice President Kamala Harris's statements. NTD's Jason Blair brings us the latest.
Vice President Kamala Harris finished up 2 rallies in North Carolina on Thursday and campaigned in Pennsylvania on Friday. In Charlotte on Thursday, Harris echoed her intention to help business startups, calling small businesses the, quote, backbone of America's economy.
So my plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses.
Harris praised the Affordable Care Act and had a warning about former President Trump's intentions for it.
Donald Trump intends to end the Affordable Care Act. And as Stacey mentioned, you heard what he said in the debate. He has no plan.
The Trump campaign responded, saying that's not what he intends to do. They posted a video from one of Trump's rallies.
I'm going to keep the Affordable Care Act unless we can do something much better.
Harris also prompted a response from the Trump team regarding Social Security and Medicare.
He intends to cut Social Security and Medicare, and he wants to impose what is in effect a national sales tax. I call it a Trump sales tax.
The Trump campaign's X account said that these statements are false. Also on Thursday, Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, campaigned in Michigan, and on Friday, Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff campaigned in Mississippi and Florida. Also on Thursday, Trump said on social media that he would not debate Harris again. The Harris-Walz campaign spokesperson suggested Friday that Trump's decision was due to poor performance during the debate and said that voters were, quote, repulsed by the positions he expressed. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Factory workers of the aviation company Boeing have gone on strike for the first time since 2008 after rejecting a new labor contract offer. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
94% of over 30,000 members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers of the Boeing Company, its largest unionized group of workers, voted Thursday night to reject the new labor contract and go on strike.
Strike! Our members voted across Puget Sound, Portland, Moses Lake, Victorville, Edwards Air Force Base, and other remote locations. This is about respect. This is about addressing the past, and this is about fighting for our future.
We've been working like dogs, long hours, busting our ass at Boeing. And let me tell you what, Boeing's a good company, right? They're a good company, but it has to work both ways. It can't just be one way. That's right.
The Boeing company issued a statement saying that they remain committed to resetting their relationship with their employees and the union and are ready to get back to the table to reach a new agreement. The Boeing company offered workers a 25% wage increase in the new labor contract, but the unionized workers are demanding 40%.
So far, what I've seen here is a lot of strong power with our union. A lot of the members are pretty upset about our first offer. We're hoping that the second offer is what we're looking for. If not, we're just going to keep going against them, and we're going to keep striking and standing for ourselves.
The strike comes as the FAA director is set to testify before the Senate on the safety culture of the Boeing company. And this week, Boeing's Starliner capsule made its uncrewed return to Earth from the International Space Station after a malfunction grounded its crew back in June. Industry analysts estimate that a 30-day strike would cost the Boeing company $1.5 billion in losses. The last time that Boeing workers went on a strike was in 2008, and it lasted for 2 months. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Early voting is just days away in Pennsylvania, but Democrat and Republican groups are fighting over mail-in ballot rules. Democrats complain the rules are too strict. Republicans argue that the entire system is broken. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards breaks down the mounting lawsuits on both sides.
We will win Pennsylvania.
Hello, Pennsylvania. How are we doing, Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania is a key battleground state that is critical to the presidential candidate's chances of winning in November. With 19 electoral votes, one of the highest counts among all states, Pennsylvania is among the most highly sought after. As in other states, Republicans and Democrats are clashing in dozens of lawsuits this year. Their biggest disagreement? Mail-in ballots. This fight has been going on since the 2020 election. Now, both sides are armed with groups of lawyers, clogging Pennsylvania court dockets in several counties. Last month, a panel of state court judges ruled that 2 of the state's largest counties can't throw out misdated mail-in ballots. The ruling rejects an election law that flags ballots with misdated envelopes. Liberal groups claim the provision disenfranchises voters. The court said although the date provision has been discussed in numerous lawsuits, this is the first to claim that it violates the Pennsylvania Constitution. Some of the plaintiffs in this state case filed a similar lawsuit in federal court. A divided federal appeals court panel in March ruled that the provision did not violate federal civil rights laws. But state court judge Ellen Ciesler wrote that because the date on the outer envelope is not used to determine the timeliness of a ballot, a voter's qualifications, eligibility to vote, or fraud, the refusal to count it violates the fundamental right to vote. Governor Josh Shapiro said in an X post that it was a victory for Pennsylvanians' fundamental right to vote. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled on Friday that the mail ballots must have the correct date on them to be counted. In 2020, former President Trump challenged the validity of mail-in ballots. At that time, the state Supreme Court ruled that absent any proof of fraud, citizens shouldn't be deprived of the right to vote. Meanwhile, a full panel of federal appeals court justices refused to rehear the civil rights claim at the time. That 2020 case is now back before the lower court for consideration under the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. In 2020, 1.7 million Pennsylvania Democrats returned ballots by mail, compared to about 600,000 Republicans.
Anytime you have mail-in voting, too, you're going to have a crooked election. Remember that. Mail-in voting. Even Jimmy Carter, with his commission, said you can't have mail-in voting.
Despite Trump's doubts, Republican groups in Pennsylvania are rallying their voters to accept mail-in voting. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans advanced a bill in March to eliminate election drop boxes. And in June, Pennsylvania voters sued the state in federal court, claiming the entire election system is flawed. The legal action, called a writ of mandamus, asked the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania to require state and federal agencies to address what they believe is mass fraud in the election system. Department of State Secretary Al Schmidt, Attorney General Michelle Henry, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and several state offices are also named as defendants, along with U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and the U.S. Department of Justice. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
What did Pennsylvania voters think of Tuesday night's debate? In which way do they see the state swinging? NTD's Steve Lance sat down with a group this week to discuss these questions in depth.
So we're here with a group of registered voters, all from the state of Pennsylvania. It's really an honor to have you all joining us for this special focus group a day after the presidential debate. Thank you all so much for sitting down with us. Let's get this started with first asking everybody if they have a party affiliation. How many of you here are registered Republicans? 2 registered Republicans. How many of you are registered Democrats? Registered independents? 2. Okay. So last night, watching the debate, how many of you watched the debate between Harris and Trump? How many of you are decided on Trump? How many for Harris? Okay. Did anything that Harris did last night reinforce your support for her?
Yes, I think she came out very professional. I think when she came out, she shook his hand, called him former president, and I think what he did, he looked at all mean, and his perception that he was looking mean and stuff. So I think she came out professional, and he came out being like a little bully to me.
He came across as a bully to you. Now, for people that supported Trump, Don, what did you think of former President Trump's performance last night?
I thought it was abysmal. He underperformed, and I would agree with Allison. He came across as the mean Trump instead of the statesman Trump.
But he didn't. His performance last night didn't change your view of him in terms of how you will vote in November.
Absolutely not, because deeds matter and substance matters.
I thought he got knocked off his game very early. I don't think he had the sufficient focus to bring his message to the table. He allowed his angry side to get the better of him, quite frankly. And we've all seen Trump for the last 9 years. I think he might have been spending more of his mental and psychological energy trying to filter himself rather than really doing what everybody said he needed to do, which was to focus on the issues, focus on the substance, and get that out there.
She had him on his heels, and I can't even articulate as to what specifically it was that was said that would have caused it, but it seemed to me that he was placed on defense quickly and could not recover from that.
So with that said, I want to talk about policy issues. Pennsylvania, obviously a key battleground state. All eyes on Pennsylvania for the next 50 some odd days. So this is a question for everybody. By a show of hands, do you think that we are better off now than we were 4 years ago when President Biden and Kamala Harris took office?
I think we're better off.
I'm going to point to the pre-COVID economy that Trump built, from the day that he took office until the governors around the country started shutting down state economies. That economy can't hold a candle. This economy cannot hold a candle to that economy. Inflation, gross domestic product, GDP growth, new housing starts, new business starts, the market, you name it. The economy pre-COVID was firing on all 8 cylinders. Right now it's not.
I couldn't in that moment think of one singular way in which I could articulate possibly, as an objectively reasonable person, that my life has improved at all under this administration. In fact, everything I could think of is worse.
I live in a household where we track virtually every expense and every dollar except for between $400 and $600 in cash in the course of a year. I can tell you my household expenses as a retired person on a fixed income are 31.6% higher last year in 2023 than they were in 2020. I can also tell you that my Social Security didn't go up by that amount. My Medicare premiums went up by far more than, as a percentage, than my Social Security did.
So just quickly, through your lens, if the election were tomorrow, and based on what you feel objectively, which way is Pennsylvania going to land?
I expect there will be a slight shift in the polling data that will come out on Sunday to Monday. I think that'll settle out. But if you look at each of the previous 2 election cycles, the indicators would suggest that Donald J. Trump is going to eke out a win.
Just looking at the last 2 presidential election cycles, Pennsylvania has been won. It has not been won by more than 2% of them. I think it was 1.7% was in the last few election cycles. So it's going to be a very narrow race.
In your universe, in your social circles, are there people that were either Republican or Democrat before this election and are changing their vote?
What we've been seeing in Bucks County is, and I don't know if this is reflected statewide, you may have seen better data than I have, is that pretty much on a weekly basis, we're seeing anywhere from, let's say, 70 to 80 people changing their registration from Democrat to Republican, and then the independents are just behind them, maybe 50 or 60 or so. Are changing from independent to Republican. So we are seeing, and we've been seeing this trend now, I would say for the last 4 years, where the party flips, because people flip in both directions, but the party flips from Democrat and from independent to Republican are outweighing those going in the opposite direction.
Taylor Swift last night after the debate endorsing Kamala Harris. How many people think that endorsement will have an impact. I believe she has over 280 million followers on X and different social media, very loyal following. Show of hands? No?
I think she's going to have a little impact. I think that she's out there in the media and she's influenced. She got her followers, and they follow just like they follow Trump. They probably go follow her. Some of them, not all of them.
Now, Allison, I want to ask you, in your microcosm, you're right here from the city of Philadelphia. Tell us what you're hearing from your community. What are the biggest issues that matter to folks, and which way, if you were to take a guess, just based on what you're feeling, if the election were to be tomorrow, how would the state of Pennsylvania go? To whose favor?
I think it's Kamala. I think it will go in her favor. I know in my community, a lot of people. Some people like Trump, some people like Kamala, and some people just don't want to vote at all.
Now, why don't they want to vote?
So they don't like either candidate.
And so is there anything that he could do to change your mind? Because like you said, you are an independent.
Well, not.
Nothing you could foresee?
No. If he keep on going on the way that he's speaking, just calling people names, it just turns me off. So I don't think he's a leader. He doesn't even sound professional.
Jacob, you talk to us about, obviously a Pennsylvania voter. What are you sensing in your community?
I couldn't tell you or give you a number of how many independents that are voting Republican with enthusiasm and how many Democrats that have said almost all something to the effect of, I cannot afford 4 more years of this. I'm voting for Trump.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. Really fascinating insight into the voters in this very important and critical battleground state. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Fracking and energy policy in general play important roles for voters in Pennsylvania. To help us better understand fracking and how it impacts the election, we're joined by Kelly Sloan. He's an energy policy consultant and columnist. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, to begin, Kelly, VP Harris is in Pennsylvania again today. This is a key battleground state that many say she has to win. Energy looms large over the state, especially fracking. Now, to begin, help us understand why fracking and energy policy are so crucial, not just for Pennsylvania, but all of America.
Thanks for having me on. So fracking, of course, is how most of America's oil and natural gas is produced these days. Most of it's in tight shale, and it's only accessed by this process known as hydraulic fracturing, or fracking for short. This process has helped the United States become more or less energy independent, at least be able to produce more oil than it needs to bring in from overseas. So in terms of energy policy, fracking is pretty much key to that.
Now, you've often said before that energy security is national security. Given that, how do you view the current proposals from Trump and Harris when it comes to their energy plans for America?
Well, I'd characterize both of them as vague, particularly Vice President Harris's. She has said previously, in her last run for president in the primary in 2019, she was quite clear that she wanted to do fracking. And of course, now she's says she's adjusted her attitude on that, and that she won't ban fracking, that the Biden administration didn't, and so on and so forth. It's a little disingenuous because there's the President of the United States can't really ban fracking. All that they can do in terms of banning fracking, they could ban it on federal lands, and only about 27% of the oil and gas produced in the United States is from federally owned land. So in terms of a frack ban, she couldn't really ban fracking overall, even if she wanted to. Now, there's other ways that energy policy can be brought in to kind of do a de facto ban, and that's in securing leases, offering leases on federal land, that kind of thing. But again, it's only going to be in relation to federally owned land, which again is only about a little over a quarter of what the United States actually produces. There's not much she could do, or that any president could do, to ban fracking on privately held land. Now, there's other regulations that they can put in place. There's a lot that the states can do to, like they did in Colorado, for instance, and place in California. But a lot of this that we're hearing from particularly the Harris campaign in terms of what her policy would be in fracking, is a little disingenuous because she's not really giving any detail of how she would handle things like issuing leases on federal land or offshore leases, or what kind of regulatory pressures will be put in place short of an actual ban on that process.
And given all of that, how important is the issue of fracking and energy in general to this election? Could the outcome in November come down to this issue?
I don't think it would come down specifically to this issue. Now, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania is one of the 3 battleground states, and it's kind of critically important for the economy in that state, where they're doing a considerable amount of natural gas drilling in the Marcellus Shale. If it comes down to Pennsylvania, yes, I think there's a fair chance that that particular issue, and that's why you see Vice President Harris, being so adamant that she is not banning fracking, that she's adjusted her point of view on this. I hope she has, but I think we need to paint all of this with a bit of a political brush. The Harris-Walz campaign needs Pennsylvania, and fracking and energy development is crucial to Pennsylvania. Now, the other part of the question is how much will the Trump administration be able to fund this issue? He didn't do a great job of it during the last debate, obviously, where he could have, and I believe should have, pushed back on, why are you changing your position? What would your policy be? What would your policy towards nuclear be? We haven't heard any of that, quite frankly, from either campaign. But I do think that both campaigns' approaches to national energy policy should be front and center, even if they're not.
Zooming out a bit here, the Biden-Harris administration has pushed for so-called green or renewable energy, moving away from the fossil fuels and gas, while Trump has his line of drill, baby, drill. Now, is there another kind of energy that could maybe meet both goals, cleaner while allowing the U.S. to be energy independent, maybe like nuclear?
Well, certainly nuclear could. And, again, I think it's disheartening that neither campaign is really focusing on the nuclear question. Now, both parties suddenly seem to be in favor of nuclear energy for different reasons. The Democrats, after decades of being vehemently opposed to nuclear energy, are all of a sudden kind of embracing it. You saw elements of support for nuclear energy in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a climate bill. And from the Democrats' point of view, because yes, it is zero emissions, it will help, in bringing down greenhouse gas emissions, and it's safe. And unfortunately, renewables simply are not going to be able to make up the difference if you were to get rid of fossil fuels. Right now, renewables, including wind and solar, together are only making up about 20% of our electrical generation in the United States. And it's pretty much capped there. That's pretty much where it's been for the last decade or so. Even as we get advances in battery technology and other advances in wind and solar technology, it's pretty much capped at that because wind and solar are not dispatchable resources the way that natural gas or coal or nuclear energy are, that when you need more, you can ramp it up. That's why we've been seeing for years in California, this summer as well, rolling blackouts, because the more demand you have for electricity and the more you try and take off those dispatchable resources that you need, like fossil fuels, and don't replace it with something like nuclear that's also dispatchable, you're going to end up with shortages. And what we're seeing in California could be a harbinger of what we could see nationwide if the wrong policy comes into place. And I do believe that nuclear is valid, it's safe, and should be something that both campaigns would think would be taken seriously, and telling the American people a little bit how they would bring about policies to get us to where we should be on nuclear.
And Kelly, you did mention that both sides, the Republicans and Democrats, are going after nuclear for different reasons, the Democrats being that it is cleaner. Why are Republicans for it?
Well, Republicans have always been for nuclear, simply, I think, because it does represent this technological advance that was really pioneered here in the United States for the most part. And it's always been such I think, an obvious solution to both our energy needs and our environmental needs. Even back in the 1970s, when we were dealing with OPEC and all the issues that came around with that, nuclear ought to have been on the table. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Democratic administrations, Democratic governments at all levels, the environmental left has been so vehemently opposed to nuclear that over the decades they've put in block after block after block, regulatory, just stymieing this industry to the point where you kind of wonder now whether it's almost too late to try and turn that back. Whether we've put in so many roadblocks in front of nuclear that now it becomes expensive to bring a a nuclear plant online, and that I don't know that it's going to take a long time to kind of fix some of those policy mistakes that have been promulgated over the last 40, 50 years.
Kelly Sloan, energy policy consultant and columnist, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Former President Trump on Thursday announced he won't debate his rival, Vice President Kamala Harris, a second time, but are voters hoping for a rematch? And were any questions left unanswered in the debate? NTD's Sam Wong was out at the National Mall to find out what voters have to say.
Are you looking forward to a potential second debate, if there is one?
Okay, I don't believe there will be one because I don't think Trump will accept a second debate. And I'm also a registered Republican.
I would love Trump to do another debate with Kamala.
I honestly couldn't care less at this point because I already know who I'm voting for, and I think a lot of the majority of Americans do as well.
Not really, because if the conditions are not fair for both candidates, especially President Trump, then I'm not interested.
So Trump said he's not down for a second debate. So do you think this could potentially hurt him?
I think, no, it's not going to hurt him because, again, I think a lot of people have already kind of made up their minds. But, I mean, he is who he is and she is who she is.
Well, yes, I think it would hurt him because he didn't do it well in this last debate.
No, because the people that he has behind him will never change.
Yes, I think either candidate saying I don't want another one would come off as showing that maybe they were scared to do another one, so I think that could hurt.
He knows in his mind he didn't win it, and he doesn't want a second one for sure.
He still has my vote. Doesn't matter. I can see right through Kamala's lies.
In your opinion, what were some of the questions that were left unaddressed or unanswered in the first debate?
Just the details of what their plan is. The only two things he really talked about was $2,500 for new home buyers and $6,000 for first year. Well, there's not a lot of people that fit in that category in the whole population.
A lot of, can I get a yes or no, that the moderator said, never got a yes or no. None of those hard questions, just gave what we wanted to hear.
So when Harris was asked about her thoughts on the illegals coming into over the southern border, she absconded and she didn't answer it. When she was asked a whole host of different questions, she just skirted around him, didn't want to hear it.
I would say is lack of policy discussion.
On both sides, or?
More so on Trump's side.
You know, Kamala's always saying, let's turn the page, but she can't seem to turn the page on January 6th. They asked Trump, would you do anything differently that day? What he should have done was called in the National Guard himself.
I would like to see whoever is elected into office start working on stricter policy and measures for cybercrime. You've got billions of dollars being scammed out of Americans, and that's not even touched upon. So
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the NFL, where the Miami Dolphins quarterback left last night's game with a concussion. Do they have any idea of how long he could be out?
No, they still haven't announced anything yet. This is on Tua Tagovailoa. I'll be very surprised, though, if it's a quick turnaround, like one game or something, because his concussion history well documented. This is his fourth in his last 5 years, and that's of the ones we know of anyway. And he made headlines a couple years ago when they cleared him to return from what looked like a concussion, only to suffer a significant one then 4 days later, where he actually lost consciousness on the field very briefly. Now, last night's concussion came when he was on the run and essentially ran into Damar Hamlin's arm and shoulder area. He then kind of went into what they call a fencing position, which is like this involuntary posture. His arms were in this unnatural position. So it was a really scary scene for a bit. Fortunately, he was able to walk off the field on his own power last night. Of course, he did not return to the game. Meanwhile, the Bills beat the Dolphins yet again. I think that's 14 times out of 16. So it was quite a scene last night.
Well, elsewhere in the league, Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Marquise Brown will undergo surgery on his shoulder next week and be placed on injured reserve. What does this mean for their offense?
Well, they played well in week 1 without him already. I mean, he's been injured for like already a month. They thought that was going to heal on its own. It didn't. But like I said, they beat a good Baltimore team on Thursday Night Football in week 1 without him. Now, he was really part of 2 big offseason acquisitions for that wide receiver room. They signed him and they drafted Xavier Worthy in the first round. But I think they're also anticipating not only did they have a kind of weak receiver room, but Rashee Rice, who was their top receiver last year, they were anticipating he might have some legal problems that could jeopardize some of this season. But it doesn't look like that's actually going to happen. So when Brown does come back, he should be a huge get for them. The problem is we still don't know how long that'll be. I mean, they put him on injured reserve, which means at least 4 weeks. So that puts them at least into October. It could be later than that. So it's not good news, but it looks like they can absorb this loss, as things stand right now.
Well, shifting gears to golf, Tiger Woods announced he underwent surgery on his back this morning. Now, the procedure could have him sidelined for 2 to 3 months. How will this affect his tournament schedule?
It doesn't look like it's going to affect it that much, actually. He hasn't played since the Open Championship. That was in July. That was the 4th and final major of the season. And he said he was really only going to play those majors, and that's what he's done. Unfortunately, though, he struggled at them. The only one where he made the cut was the Masters. So although he was playing, it really wasn't the Tiger that we remember. Now, the next tournament he was going to play in is the Hero World Challenge in December, and then he actually hosts that event, so he has time. But the surgery he had today was because of back spasms. Now, this is actually the 6th lower back surgery he's had in the last 10 years. Now, before these leg injuries that have propped up since that car accident a couple years ago, he had major back problems about 10 years ago that really derailed his career for several years. So we hope this isn't another severe case of that again.
And looking at college football, we have another big weekend that actually starts tonight as Arizona plays at Kansas State. But what do you see as some of the best games to watch?
There's not a big game like top 10 showdown like there was last week. We had Michigan versus Texas that Texas ended up really actually beating them pretty good. But you definitely have some good rivalry matchups. We got Oregon versus Oregon State, Washington versus Washington State. Now, those are the old Pac-12 rivalries. Oregon State, Washington State have been left behind as the 2 out of the 12 teams that did not get an invite to a power conference. I think they've got something to prove, though, against Washington and Oregon. And especially with Oregon, they've been almost on upset alert the last 2 weeks. Kind of struggled against Idaho and Boise State, so that could be a game to watch. Now, elsewhere, Alabama plays at Wisconsin. Now, Alabama has obviously been a powerhouse team, but they are under a new coach now this year, so you could expect a little bit of an adjustment period. And Wisconsin has been historically a good program. Plus, also you have Notre Dame playing Purdue. Now, the Irish have had an up and down start. They won at Texas A&M, and somehow they lost to Northern Illinois last week. So that could be a good one as well. So no huge matchups, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting games.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.